Hi everyone, we're back. Welcome to today's edition of HomeGames. Today it's me again back in the chair, and I'm joined by Anthony Morrow, who is a co-founder of OpenMoney. Hi Anthony, how are you?
Very well.
Good. A man of few words. Thank you.
I'm saving them. I'm saving them for the important bits.
Yeah, don't peak too early. No, that's good. Great. Well, yeah. So we're going to cover quite a bit of ground, I think, in the next sort of 45 minutes or so. So Anthony's here to kind of talk about his latest advice gap report, which I actually have handily here. So that's the one. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and some of the findings from that and kind of what that tells us about advice, the advice market, the advice profession, that kind of thing. But then we're also going to get into some other wider financial services sector stuff as well. So if you've got questions for Anthony, there are two ways you can do it, which I think a lot of you kind of know by now. But there is a chat box down the side where you can kind of put in your questions, or if you prefer, you can do the ask a question button at the bottom. So those are the ways you can kind of keep in touch with us, and we generally find that the more people get involved and interact, the better for everyone. So yeah, keep your questions coming for Anthony, and then I can just sit back and relax. And then the only other thing to say is that if you're having any technical audio video problems your end, there's a button which says get audio video help, and then if you click that, that should kind of reset things and should sort everything out. But we're not going to have any technical problems today, so we're just going to get into the chat. So Anthony, maybe if you could start off really, I guess, by explaining the advice gap report, because this is the kind of third iteration I think you've done of this now. So perhaps maybe why this is kind of a project that's important to you and some of the latest findings, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, it's the third version of the report that we've produced, but it's actually the fourth version that's ever been produced. And the original document was produced by Citizens Advice Bureau in 2015. And it was a really important document in terms of open money, because at that point, or 2016 when it came out based on 2015 numbers, obviously the thinking behind open money and launching open money was pretty advanced. And actually that document really cemented it, because it showed that whilst from experience and just general understanding of the industry, you could see that actually financial advice was becoming increasingly exclusive for people with ever increasing sums of money. The value of advice was there for everyone, and it was just the fact that people either couldn't afford it or they couldn't get hold of it. And to have a document from Citizens Advice Bureau pretty much confirming that, saying that actually people would really benefit from being able to speak to someone and get told what to do with their money, if only they could find someone who was willing to speak to them, and they could they could afford the costs that were associated with advice. So that document, really, it was instrumental to open money and has been in terms of what it is we're trying to do for that part of the population. And then in 2018, the thought came about that, well, why don't we take that document and make it our own? Just carry on from what Citizens Advice Bureau did, and we've known the LandCap people for a long time, respect what they do, and they seemed a really great partner to be able to help us with that. So we spoke to Citizens Advice Bureau. I must admit, I am flattered that I've got the brains of the operation talking to me today. I know Mark's poorly, but
yeah, Mark's on his sick bed, so
yeah, exactly. But even so, it's great to have you talking to me.
Mike's sending you hearts, so it's getting a bit of a LandCat loving, so we better move the conversation swiftly.
We will move it on. So we spoke to Citizens Advice Bureau, said, would you mind if we took what you'd done a couple of years ago and moved it on? And it worked really two ways. One, it enables us to produce a document that really informs a lot of our thinking here at OpenMoney. So an obvious standout from some of the earlier findings, certainly in 2019's document, was around buy now, pay later, which we went on to do further work around the You Only Pay Once campaign. But it identified buy now, pay later as an increasing area for customers that was becoming a worry and becoming more prevalent in people's finances. So from that point of view, the document really helps us understand, hopefully early, some of the trends that we're seeing in terms of people's finances. And then I think, secondly, it also helps us as part of a wider advice community, advice industry, knowledge piece. Really, we're big champions of advice. Clearly, we think advice is the gold standard. We think it's fantastic for people to get financial advice. There's just not enough people out there to provide enough people with advice, and that's where we want to come in and help create a solution so that everyone has that gold standard and doesn't have to accept second tier solutions that I'm sure we'll talk about later. So the document, whilst on an annual basis, it might feel as though there's nothing incredibly surprising that comes out of it. Oh wow, only 12% of people have received or paid for financial advice in the last 12 months. You think, wow, that's not a surprise or anything, but it shouldn't be framed like that. It should be like, right, okay, well, how do we go about increasing that number? What do we have to do to get more people engaging with our brilliant industry? Because it can't just be that we say, oh, right, okay, well, that's fine. 12% is fine because everyone's doing all right out of it. There's no need for us to try and create or innovate to get that number higher. So it informs a lot around what people are wanting from advice. The fact that on the affordable advice gap, which is obviously the important one for certainly today and today's audience. That's the gap that is, people want advice if they could afford it, or they were, or they could find it and were willing to pay the fees. That's the important one, because that shows that there are people out there who want advice, are willing to pay for it, but just aren't convinced around the value of advice at the moment, or have an idea around what level of fee they want to pay. But at 6 million people, that's a huge market. That is a huge market for us as an industry to try and engage with and try and create solutions to do that. Because the more exclusive financial advice becomes, the harder it then becomes to champion it as a real value for people around money. And I think a lot of the narrative that we see coming out of the industry at the moment is that a lot of those 6 million people are either, well, if they don't value what we do, then that's their hard luck, or until they value what we do, we'll create something that may or may not be of any use at all, but at least we're doing something. And that just feels like a bit of a cop-out, really, with regards to all this conversation around guidance and nudges and simplified advice, or whatever it's called this week. We should be thinking, well, actually, financial advice is brilliant. We know there's 6 million people out there who would benefit from advice, who want advice. How do we create a solution for that? Rather than thinking, right, how do we create a solution that solves an advice gap that isn't advice? Because you're answering a different question.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I guess one of the things that you kind of I took from kind of looking at this report was that actually, for all the kind of post RDR move to an advice profession type chat that we have, actually that gap seems to be if anything, getting worse rather than getting better in terms of the difference between the people who could benefit from advice but aren't taking it. So why do you think that's the case? Why do you think, despite some of the moves we've seen, that gap still persists and is getting bigger, arguably?
Well, I think RDR did a couple of really good things, but the idea that it was ever going to be the sort of panacea for advice and was going to solve a lot of problems for people, for a lot of people, was fanciful. I think the RDR was, was certainly but the industry is in a much better shape than it was pre-RDR. I think the quality of the products are better. There is more transparency out there. The level of professionalism has increased through the qualifications and the removal of opaque charging structures are all really good things. On their own, that is not going to convince someone to take advice, or it's not suddenly going to make advice more accessible, or it's not going to make advice more affordable. There are very strong arguments to say that RDR hasn't helped in terms of making advice affordable. But there are arguments used, but I think you would always take transparency and simple product structures and simple charging structures over affordability. I think the challenge for the industry is to take those wins that RDR has afforded, so in terms of transparency, and still deal with the affordability issue around charges. I mean, ultimately, charging hasn't really been affected at all by RDR because it comes down to the same, the age-old supply and demand. There's just not enough advisors out there to deal with all the people at once. So, they can, continue to, be more selective in terms of the customers. I mean, there's some great advisors out there. There's some great advisors out there. And, the ones I speak to and the ones I know are in rude health. They are as busy as they've ever been. So actually, where's the incentive for them to actually start looking at lower value customers? There is none. And, it's not really for them to do that. And actually, it would be very difficult for them to do that because trying to create, and I can vouch for this firsthand, trying to create a solution that deals with people who don't have a lot of money at scale can't be done as a side project to your main business. It's not easy. It's not cheap. So what's the incentive for, traditional advisors who are doing great stuff for customers who are paying the fees to get involved? The solution isn't coming from there or shouldn't be expected to come from there.
Okay. Yeah, Billy kind of makes the point here. Hi, Billy. He says the elephants in the room are trust and cost. And I know this is something that you talk about quite a lot in the report itself. He says we're slowly building trust, but what about costs? How do we get the cost of advice down? And quite a big question, what is the minimum cost of advice, do you think?
Well, I think the point on trust is really good. And just calling back to the RDR, I think if anything that the RDR has delivered, then it is some increase in trust, and that becomes because of the heightened professionalism and qualifications and transparency. I think the industry still it's far too good at finding ways in which to shoot itself in the foot with a scam here or there, rightly or wrongly. It may only be a small part of the industry that does it, but it affects all of us. The continued issues around DB transfers and regulated, customers don't understand whether what part of the world that comes from, whether or not it's an advised customer or a non-advised customer or an unregulated advisor. It's just money, and it's a money issue, and it's people losing money. So that taints us all. There has been progress made in trust, but there's still a lot to do there, I think. In terms of costs, what's the minimum cost of that? Yeah, I don't know. We started out clearly trying to keep our costs down to a level where we knew that that part of the population were willing to engage, and that meant having to, one, accept that we would have a really narrow range of areas that we would advise on. So it's much narrower than you would see at a traditional advice, but actually, it's more than enough to deal with the vast majority of people out there. For the vast majority of people out in the in the general public, they don't maximize their ISA and they don't maximize their pension.
Yeah.
And they don't need to talk around inheritance tax or trusts or those sort of things. Certainly not in the early stages of their life, which we're an accumulation business, so we don't even have to get involved in the more complex side. So that enables us to start a business model and to build a set of processes and advice process around a very finite number of areas, even though it will deal with vast majority of people's requirements, and using technology and obviously the hybrid model, allowing us to deliver face-to-face advice, face-to-face access to an advisor for those customers who need it, which of course isn't all of them. That allows us to have a starting point focused on, right, how do we minimize costs? How do we keep our costs to a level that we know the majority of people will afford? And that starting point helps us, will be very different to other advisors out there. So I don't think there is this arbitrary number that's how much advice should cost, because it will vary depending on from business to business. Now that does throw in a big question as to how can we have such a homogenized level of charging in the industry at, let's say, 3 and 1 or whatever, or 1 and 1 or 3 and a half.
That's usually 3 and a half, isn't it? Yeah.
Despite everyone having, I guess, different ways in which they, different parts of the country, different costs, different ways in which they engage with their customers, different customers.
And yet the cost is kind of...
And yet the customer is fairly
that figure,
fairly standard. So in terms of what a minimum cost of advice is, we know what our minimum cost of advice is, and we've built the processes around that. Ultimately, as I said earlier, costs have remained pretty static in the industry because of supply and demand. If the ultimate arbiter to value and price is the customer, isn't it? So deciding on what's fair or not ultimately comes down to the customer, I think.
Yeah. And so we kind of started from a place where sort of the default traditional model, if you like, was face-to-face. And then we kind of have online models and digital models like yours. And then over the last kind of couple of years, there's been increasing talk about this hybrid model because of the different ways of working and stuff. But I'd be interested to hear what you think in terms of online advice and what that model sort of the advantages it offers, I guess, as opposed to more face-to-face options. Are there times when online can trump face-to-face, if you like?
Well, I mean, we couldn't exist as a face-to-face model. I mean, a really important point to make. Oh Christ, lights have gone out.
Do you need to do a bit of waving?
Perhaps I need to charge
motion sensor.
I need to charge a bit more so I can pay the bills. We couldn't deliver our service face-to-face. And an important point is that 70% of the customers who come to us wanting to invest or thinking they're coming to invest, we tell them not to, because they're simply not in a position to deliver that. And obviously we've had to expand the proposition to accommodate those people, so that whilst we're telling them they can't invest now because they've got debts, they haven't got any cash savings, they don't want to take any risk. We want they clearly at some point are going to have to start saving for the future, and we want to help them get there to do that. But with that sort of, that sort of level of don't invest recommendations, and on the scale that we deliver them. I mean, we've delivered over 100,000 recommendations in 4 years. It just physically, you just simply couldn't do that on a face-to-face basis. So again, you have to build the technology to enable us to do that at scale with very, very negligible incremental cost. If we could deliver one piece of advice a day or 10,000, the incremental cost is nothing in terms of the cost of actually delivering that. But you have to build, that in mind to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're not going to get the process right or the costs right.
Yeah, because I think when we were talking before, I was mentioning about a conference that I was at where they were talking about online advice, and advisors were kind of reflecting on their experience of the last 18 months or so, and that actually they'd been quite surprised by how online could work for them and work for the clients. So in terms of, if you're doing intergenerational planning and you've got the clients and their kids and the advisor all sat in the lounge, it all feels a bit almost a bit money grubbing from the children's perspective. They're just here to kind of be part of this conversation because, there's some money down the line or whatever. But actually, some advisors have said that by doing that online and remotely, you just get that bit of distance, and it becomes much more about like, how can we work together as opposed to who's out for what. And I think that's probably something that you've seen as well in terms of the types of clients that you work with.
Yeah, so the hybrid model that we have was, we built that to start off with because we wanted to really maximize the amount of people who we gave a recommendation to who actually affected that recommendation. And we could see that for our target market, which are people with very limited investment experience and they've never done it before, pretty uncertain, and we're a new brand, the chances, we would increase our chances of getting people to say, yeah, you should invest 100 quid a month into your ISA and 100 quid a month into your pension, or whatever the sums are, but around there. If there was an option for them to go, actually not sure, do you want to just speak to someone and get a bit of validation? And certainly in the early stages, I mean, at the moment we've been at about 10% of customers actually take up the opportunity to have a 20-minute chat with one of our advisors. And in the early stages, it was almost all around, they just wanted to know, one, that we were real and we weren't just some random Maltese website. And then secondly, what they were doing was the right thing for them to do. And it was pure validation and assurance. And the feedback generally has been, we may not want to speak to you now, but it's really comforting to know that at some point, if circumstances change, so they may not speak to us or speak to an advisor for 3 years, but in the 4th year, some life event might happen, which changes things. They might need to speak to an advisor 4 or 5 times, and the comfort they get from knowing that it's there just in case, is really valuable, and it works for us. And I can see how that is going to be a model that just goes forward. Probably the pandemic has helped accelerate that. But as you touched upon there, so we've got customers. I think we've got an 89-year-old customer called Sid who came on, who became a customer because his daughter was a customer, and he loves speaking to the advisor through digital thing. First couple of times, obviously his daughter was there, but subsequently he's spoken on his own. And again, getting feedback from both of those was around convenience and the idea that perhaps in other models there is the requirement for people to either take time off work, or in their case, because they're both retired, make the trip into town, which is not going to be easy for 89-year-old Sid to move in, to go into either town or even into a city to do that. And then the flip side, which is one that, I hadn't really considered, but when you're told it, it becomes quite obvious, is that certainly for older people, they can find it quite intimidating to have someone come into their home.
Suited and booted, sitting on their couch,
inconvenient. Yeah, exactly. But someone in there, particularly if they want to ask questions or not. Now that probably that will very much depend on the relationship that the advisor or the person has with that customer. But if you can certainly see, if you're not seeing that advisor regularly, and they come in and it's to go through paperwork or something like that, then you can see how it can be intimidating, and you can see how perhaps less good things can come from that. So the hybrid model sort of just provide a bit of security on both sides, I think, in terms of because it's great for compliance from our point of view, because there's a perfect audit trail around what's being said and what's being done, because all our calls and video conferences are recorded. So it's great from that. And you always want to keep compliance happy, don't you?
Yeah. That should always be the message. So thank you for that. So I guess turning now to kind of more industry matters, and there's obviously been an increasing trend for people to get their financial information from something other than a reputable source, shall we say. So a lot of that will be the social media, the TikTok, the Facebook, all of that kind of thing. And that's kind of also where the scammers kind of play, and it tends to be a space, although this is changing a little bit, but it tends to be a space where advisors and planners aren't in so much. So I kind of just wanted to get your sense of all of that, in terms of, is there anything firms can do to kind of counteract that, if that is their job, and just, I suppose, your take on the challenges of communicating online, really?
Yeah, I think for us, then obviously online and digital marketing and advertising is our primary route to customers, getting new customers. And certainly more so than I would guess traditional advisors I know out there, I wouldn't imagine they need to have that much online presence beyond some, housekeeping. But certainly in terms of customer acquisition, I would imagine a lot of that just comes through referrals, professional connections, and the same way. And because actually it is not a simple route as saying, right, well, we're going to have an online presence, we're going to do some adverts, we're going to put them on Instagram, and the customers are going to come flocking. It just doesn't work like that. It needs a lot of effort. It needs a lot of money because it's very busy out there. You know your own timeline. To try and get prominence and cut through on there, just to get someone to notice it, let alone trying to get someone to
interact with it, pick up the phone,
call to actions and get them through. You need a pretty big hopper at the top that you fill up to get a handful of people through to customers. So it is hard. It is hard work, and certainly on things like finance, which it's difficult to get difficult attention on finance when next
unless
up on
you're
the
a celebrity
timeline
footballer or something.
Is someone doing a funny dance, and you're there trying to promote your pension. It's
not really what people go.
Maybe you can combine the two, but I'm less sure. But clearly, for younger generation, then, and I've got teenage children. That's where they're getting they're learning a lot of stuff, not just finance, but just about the world. And it comes down to there's a lot more that can be done around how we regulate that. And I hope that narrative moves forward, rather than it's just different parties pointing the finger saying, well, you need to be doing more, and then we just end up blaming the big tech platforms, and nothing.
It's normally Google and the FCA that people kind of want
and
to
and
take
nothing
more action,
happens.
isn't it?
Yeah, everyone talks, and actually nothing particular happens. But I think that there needs to be an acceptance that there is a direction of travel, and that's and social media is going to play a key part of that. Rightly or wrongly, that's just where it is. So, making people aware that a lot of these things are scams, or a lot of these things are probably not in their best interests, is an important one, because it's really easy to pick on things like crypto and some teenage American talking around stock picking and things like that on TikTok. But it's not a million miles away from what perhaps more legitimate businesses are doing in terms of promoting their services, as saying, regardless of whether or not it's the right thing for you to be doing, we're the experts, come and invest with us. It's not, it might look less, it might look a bit more iffy, but ultimately it's the same thing. The same risk, the risks are very much the same. You've got a trading app that's promoting its services. They care as much around the suitability as your random unregulated crypto, or your random teenager going on about how he's just bought a private jet off the back of Bitcoin. It's the same thing, and it's easy to get it all muddled up, and start blaming that part of the market. But there's a whole traditional, conventional part of the market that I think could do a lot more in terms of customer outcomes.
Yeah. So is your point there that, like, even though they're promoting different things, they're still promoting something irrespective of what's good for that person who's seeing that advert or that promotion? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And then so some of the news that we've seen this week is kind of so at the same time as we've got the social medias and the scams and the celebrity endorsements and stuff, you've got providers trying to capture that D2C market, haven't you? We saw the sort of very tentative talks around the Aberdeen interactive investor stuff earlier this week. So what do you think about how that might play out, subject to approvals and all of that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a surprise, really. I mean, that's a big transaction for Standard Life to be looking to do, and I guess the argument for it is, as with lots of people, I think Lloyd said something maybe a couple of months ago saying they wanted to get a share of Hargreaves' market.
Yeah.
And everyone wants a bit of Hargreaves, don't they? Everyone wants to replicate.
They're the ones that people go after. Yeah.
And for Aberdeen to be doing that, one, it's a big transaction. I think Aberdeen's worth 5 billion market cap, and they're going to try and do a £1.5 billion transaction. That's going to take a bit of work just financially to deliver. And then strategically, it probably raises more questions than it answers. From the outside looking in, you would think, well, what you're doing, it's surely it's not to complement the Finimize acquisition that unless good luck to the Finimize owners if the valuation's anywhere near the valuation they've put on II. But it just feels a bit muddled.
Okay, perhaps just some questions around the fit in terms of all the other moving pieces in that business as well.
Yeah, I'm hopefully someone could correct me in the audience, but I can't think of many examples of a successful intermediated and non-intermediated financial business
in terms of the tie-ups that have gone well.
Someone who can run an investment business through intermediaries whilst also having a significant direct business.
Yeah. So just to kind of bring in some of the audience here. So Alan was talking about the whole nutmeg JP Morgan deal. So obviously that was quite big money as well, and sort of playing in a similar space. And Mike is suggesting maybe AJ Bell might be an example of, you know, that whole
yeah, I'm just ignoring
provider
that.
and D2C stuff.
I'm ignoring that. I wish I hadn't asked him that. He's such a dick.
Fine, okay, good. I'm glad we went there.
I was giving it, I was singing his praises earlier on.
You're taking it all back.
I'm going to go and find someone else to do next year's report.
Don't do that. We still love you. Well, look, one of the things I wanted to ask, unless people want to sort of chip in with some other questions, was around, I guess, the sort of the scope for improvement that you can kind of see within the sort of financial services sector at large, in terms of whether that's A, improving the advice and investing process, or B, just kind of attracting people in. So, I mean, you talked about cost earlier. I mean, where are the areas that you think financial services as a whole kind of needs to
you know what? I think from an advice point of view, I think there's so much money at the moment flowing into the advice world through private equity and through consolidation. And, you know, whilst there's a lot of chat around what that money is going to do, I mean, it's all just buying cash flow, isn't it, really? And none of those transactions, you could say, are really moving the advice sector forward. You think the tens, hundreds of millions of pounds that are being invested in the advice business, and very little of it is being, you could see a real opportunity to invest in people, getting new people, young people into the industry, really investing in technology, and with a real focus to expanding how we deliver real quality of advice to more people. And with that much money going in, it shouldn't be beyond the wit of the people who are involved to be able to say, well, actually, we should be spending this in better places by really improving how we deliver advice. And again, just going back to how we started, there's still too much focus on the solution to this being non-advised solutions.
Or the light touch advice or something.
And nudges and guidance, and it's shit. There's no need for it. We should be better than that. We should be really, really focusing on saying, actually, okay, well, we're not going to deliver face-to-face, full-fat advice like that to everyone. Everyone doesn't need that, but everyone does need advice. We shouldn't be accepting that for those people who, and let's be clear, the only reason we're not doing that is because they're not as profitable as other customers. There's no other reason for it. It's because they're not as profitable and people don't want to take the risk. I mean, look, if you look at these non-advised models and the guidance solutions, what's effectively happening here is you have a load of experts saying, look at us, read this is our expert opinion, this is what we think, but we're not expert enough to take the risk in assessing whether or not it's the right thing for you to do. You decide that, non-expert, but when you have decided that, we'll charge you for looking after your money. So you have the experts there, and up until it comes to taking the risk on whether or not their advice is actually right, and to a portion of the people who everyone knows has poor financial literacy, will have very little experience, yet we're still saying, actually, it's all right for you still to make those decisions because we can't be asked. That's just, it's just wrong. It's so wrong to be, just disappointing, particularly with the amount of money that's banding around at the moment.
Yeah. So I suppose that whole thing around trying to appeal to some sort of middle ground that isn't quite advice, because then it's not regulated and there's no liability that goes with that. Actually,
and that's it.
Falling quite short, in your opinion.
You don't want the liability of the advice, yet you're presenting yourself as a bloody expert in the, which you are. You know way more than the person who you're telling, but you don't want to take the risk of it. You don't want the liability of it. Yet, and you'd rather.
I suppose that's the same for providers offering guidance services as well, isn't it? They want to kind of nudge people.
That's just a retention tool, isn't it? Here's a few web pages. Don't transfer your money away.
Yeah. And so do you think then, I mean, we've talked about costs and we've talked about hybrid and online models sort of as distinct things, but do you think actually the two could kind of converge in a sense that the online and hybrid models will actually serve ultimately to reduce that cost if, the plush office overheads are less and so on?
Well, I mean, we hear a lot about economies of scale and, technology efficiencies. It's where those economies of scale and technology efficiencies end up. Do they end up in the company's P&L, or do they end up by improving the value for the customer? If suddenly the cost of you delivering advice, because you're not having to travel around, you're not having to pay, for advisors to be traveling around, or you're not having to pay for, fancy offices. You've got technology that means you've got really repeatable processes and really repeatable document production, fact finding, all of that sort of stuff lowers your costs. That just, lowers the cost of your cost of sales. Do you trouser that and improve your own profitability, or do you pass it on to the customer and say, actually, we're doing things a lot more efficiently now, and actually you're going to be paying less as a result?
Okay. And then, so just kind of like drawing to a close then, I mean, what all of this is kind of pointing to the fact that obviously we know in this kind of inner circle that advice and financial planning services do amazing things for people, or even just kind of give them reassurance or whatever it happens to be. But kind of more people need to know that. And at the same time, you've got kind of quite dangerous messages out there around kind of where people should put their money and what they should do with it. So what do you think can be done to promote advice in a more open and engaging way by kind of every level of the chain, do you think?
Yeah, I think the media can play a bigger part in terms of promoting the benefits of advice. I think there's certain parts of the media who actually compete against advice. There's quite a lot of media outlets now that have their own, links to providers or investment options there. I'm not saying there's anything untoward, but it's a bit iffy. And that's it. The challenge the advice industry has is that because it's largely a large number of small businesses, it's very difficult to get a really consistent collective message out there that you would normally get, real promotion, ongoing promotion. It's not a quick fix. It needs a lot of, it would need a lot of promotion, a lot of advertising to be done, which is obviously expensive, time consuming, and you'd want your representatives, so whether it's PIMFA or, whatever it's called now, they should be doing more to promote the value of advice, because it is, there is a benefit to it. We know that because that's what the business we're in. So, if we can't promote the value of our own service, then that's it. It's just how we do that. And I think at the moment, there just doesn't feel as though there's an adequate vehicle championing advice. For everyone. And also, and I also find that even internally, there's a lot of bickering that goes on with it between advisors.
In terms of the fragmented nature of it, yeah.
Are you a planner? Are you a salesman? Are you chartered? Are you not? You can't get your own house in order and getting a consistent message out there. It makes it very difficult to do that.
Yeah. And do you think there are things so that's kind of at a collective level, but do you think there are things that individual firms can do to kind of shout about the good stuff they do?
Yeah, well, I'm sure they do. I mean, I'm sure, they're out there as part of their, how they approach customers and how they get new customers, will be there saying this is the value that we can provide. It's sort of amplifying that, isn't it? To the numbers. Even if you're looking at the 6 million here, that's a big market which takes a lot of reaching. It's how we do that as an industry, and I just don't think we just haven't got that cracked at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Probably an issue that needs a bit more firepower behind it then.
It just needs a concerted effort and a plan, and probably an industry body capable of delivering it.
Okay, somebody needs to take up that mantle then. Well, Anthony, I think that's all we've got time for. So thank you very much for your time, for being as feisty and vocal as ever.
Thanks, everyone. It was useful.
It was for me anyway. Thank you for that. Thank you to people watching at home. We'll be back next week with another special guest. But until then, that's it from us. Thanks very much for watching.